Before we get started with ratio and proportion and equations that are not proportions, it's important to mention I'm assuming you're already familiar with solving algebraic equations that do not contain fractions, as well as how to deal with fractions and clear of fractions should they be in an algebraic equation. This is the method we'll use the most in this video. A ratio is simply a comparison of two numbers. 15 out of 20 students have backpacks. My preference is to write it as a fraction. It could be written with two numbers separated by a colon. Normally, if you end up with this ratio, you would simplify it to 3/4. A proportion is simply a comparison of two ratios. They have to be equal, and I'm sure you're familiar 15/20 is the same as 3/4. Usually with the proportions that you'll be given, one value is missing. So you can see each of these algebraic equations has one value missing. Most textbooks say to use what's called cross products. They have you multiply diagonally across the equal sign. I do not advocate that approach. If you'd like to use it, that's fine. It does work, so long as you're only given a fraction equals a fraction. As soon as they say +2 or 1 plus, you cannot use that approach. Using cross products is the method that involves the least amount of thinking, but it's not necessarily the method that involves the least amount of work. If the variable's in the numerator, all we need to get rid of is the 20. So we'll multiply each side by 20, and we'll have solved for x. If the variable's in the denominator, you need to learn to get that variable out of the denominator. Okay, with our first proportion, to get x by itself, we just want to get rid of the 20. So times 20 on each side of the equal. We have a common factor of 4, so we'll reduce. Divide by 4. Divide by 4. And as always, these canceled, so you have x equals 15. With this proportion, the variable's in the denominator. So if we clear the equation of fractions, we won't have a variable in the denominator. The least common denominator is going to be 4x. So we multiply each side by 4x. We're left with 4 times 15 is 60. X times 3, 3x. Bring down our equal. You want x by itself, so divide by 3. Threes cancel. X is equal to 20. Usually I circle the answer, and I think you're well aware 15/20 is the same as 3/4. 15/20 is the same as 3/4. With this equation, to get x by itself, we just have to get rid of the 4. Times 4 times 4. Of course, they cancel. Divide by 4 leaves you with 1. Divide by 4 leaves you with 5. Let's go ahead and continue this. I have a common factor of 5 here, so divide by 5, divide by 5, and you have x equals 3. Finally, looking at this equation, again you have the variable in the denominator, so we're going to clear it of fractions. We could simplify this first, but in this case I'll just multiply by the least common denominator, 20x. Of course, the 20's cancel, the x's, You're left with 15x, 20 times 3, and now to get x by itself, divide by 15. Of course they cancel, and 60 divided by 15 is 4. So to review this, when the variable's in the numerator, I'm just going to do what I have to get the variable by itself. When the variable's in the denominator, most likely I'm going to multiply by the least common denominator to get this variable out from the denominator. As at this point and this point, I don't have a variable in the denominator. So you can see, for example, these first two are right here. So we'll solve these now. To get x by itself, one approach would be to clear this equation of fractions. We can multiply by the least common denominator, which is 10. Divide by 5, divide by 5, leaves you with 2. Divide by 10, divide by 10. So now we have 6x is equal to 7. Divide by 6 and divide by 6. I'm going to leave this as an improper fraction. Here x is in the numerator. If we clear this equation of fractions, it'll be a lot easier to deal with. The least common denominator is 10. So we multiply each term on each side by 10. Simplify. Divide by 5. Divide by 5. Divide by 10. Divide by 10. And here there's nothing to reduce, so it's just going to be 10 times 2. This gives us 6x equals 7 plus 20. You want to combine these two terms. Just bring down the 6x and now divide by 6. Of course, the 6's cancel. And with 27/6, we have a common factor of 3. Divide by 3 leaves you with 9. Divide by 3 leaves you with 2. So we end up with x equals 9/2. Now we're going to take a look at these next two. We have them here and here. So in this case, you've got a variable in the denominator. You want to get rid of this. So we'll clear this equation of fractions. The least common denominator is going to be 4 times the quantity 2y minus 9. So we multiply each term on each side by the LCD. The 4's will cancel. The quantity 2y minus 9 cancels. You're left with 3 times this quantity. Bring down your equals. And then 4 times 6y. We'll just put 24y. You're trying to get y by itself, you'll have to distribute the 3. Just bring down the equal and 24y. Get rid of 6y. Now just draw a line and bring everything down. Negative 27. This leaves us with 18y. And now just divide by 18. Of course, they cancel. So y is equal to a negative, and we can simplify. Divide by 9, divide by 9. Okay, looking at this equation, the variable's in the denominator, that's a problem, and we have a fraction over here. So we'll just clear this of fractions. The least common denominator is going to be 4 times the quantity 2y minus 9. Now right here we won't be able to cancel anything, so it'll be 1 times 4 times this quantity. Here we can cancel the 4's, and here we can cancel the quantity 2y minus 9. So again, with this we're left with 4. Bring down your plus. 3 times this quantity. Bring down your equals. And here we have 4 times 6y. We'll just put 24y. You're certainly going to have to get rid of these parentheses, so distribute the 4 and then distribute the plus 3 and bring down equals 24y. Now the best bet will be to combine like terms. 8y, 6y gives us 14y. Negative 36, negative 27 is a negative 63. Again, bring down equals 24y. Now let's get rid of the 14y. Here I just draw a line and bring everything down. That's a 0. Of course, you don't have to write it. Bring down your negative 63. And this will be, let's see, 10y. And finally, divide by 10, divide by 10. So we get y is equal to negative 63 tenths. And now we'll take care of solving these last two, here and here. With this equation, you have the variable in the denominator. So we'll clear this equation of fractions. The least common denominator is 3r. The r's cancel. The 3's cancel. Here you're left with 3 times the quantity r plus 5. Again, the fraction bar is a grouping symbol. So we'll put them in parentheses. Bring down your equals. And 2 times r. Go ahead and distribute the 3. Bring down the equals and the 2r. Let's get rid of the 3r. Bring everything down. And you can't leave a negative in front of the variable, so that's a negative 1r. We'll divide by negative 1 and divide by negative 1. So we get r is equal to negative 15. Now looking at this problem, again we have variable in the denominator, just as in the previous problem. But looking at this problem, you have a fraction on each side. So we chose to clear the equation of fractions using the least common denominator. Here, even though there's a variable in the denominator, there's no fraction on this side of the equal sign. So if I simply multiply each side of the equation by r, I'll get this out from the denominator. So the r's cancel. This leaves us with, and usually we write this as 4r without the dot. So I'll simply get rid of this r. And now to get rid of the 3, we'll divide by 3 on each side. And here obviously the 3's cancel, so we're left with r is equal to 5/3. We're going to tackle 4 more problems with a little more practice on getting that least common denominator. With this equation, you have a variable in the denominator, so you definitely want to clear this of fractions. The least common denominator is going to have an x, but then you have to turn your attention to the 6 and the 4. As indicated in an earlier video, I'll look at multiples of the biggest. 6 certainly won't work. 12. 4 goes into 12. So 12x is the least common denominator. So the x's cancel. Divide by 6 leaves you with 2 times 5. Over here, divide by 4 leaves you with 3x times 3. So again, 2 times 5 is 10. Bring down your equal. 3 times 3 is 9 times x. Divide by 9. Of course, they cancel. X is equal to 10/9. With this equation, we have the variable in the denominator. We're going to want to clear this of fractions. The least common denominator is going to be y to the first power, but then you have to turn your attention to the 6 and the 8. We'll look at multiples of the biggest. 8 certainly won't work. 16. 6 will not go into 16. 24 does work because 6 goes into 24. So the least common denominator is 24y. And the whole reason for doing this is to get rid of all these denominators. The y's cancel. Divide by 6, divide by 6. The y's cancel. Divide by 8, leaves you with 3 times 7y. You almost have y by itself. Let's get rid of 24. Bring everything down. That's a negative 21y. And here we're left with a negative 4. To get rid of the negative 21, divide by negative 21. Of course, they cancel, and you get y is equal. Negative divided by a negative is positive, so you just write this as 4 over 21. Looking at this equation, we see we have a variable in the denominator as well as a couple other fractions, so we'll just clear the equation of fractions. The least common denominator will have the quantity 3x minus 1, and then we turn our attention to the 3 and the 4. We need the least common denominator of these two values. So I'll look at multiples of the biggest. Obviously, 4 doesn't work. You try 8. 3 won't go into 8. You try 12, and 12 works because 3 goes into 12. And of course, 4 goes into 12. So 12 times the quantity 3x minus 1 is our LCD. Now we'll cancel what we can. 3x minus 1 cancels 3x minus 1. We'll be left with 12 times this quantity. Divide by 3 leaves us with 4. times 1 times the quantity, 3x minus 1. And then here, divide by 4 leaves us with 3 times this quantity. I put parentheses around the x plus 2 because the fraction bar is a grouping symbol. When I write it down here, I need to group these two values together. Bring down our negative. 4 times 1 times the quantity. Bring down the equals. And then 3 times 3 is 9 times this quantity. Now, to get to these variables, I'll have to distribute these values. We'll combine like terms. Negative 12x, positive 12x, well, that's a 0, so I can just forget about them. Positive 24 and positive 4. Let's get rid of the 9. And finally, get rid of the 27. So we're left with x, those both cancel. 37's a prime, there's no common factor, so 37 over 27. And looking at the last problem, we have variables in the denominator on each side of the equal. We want to clear this equation of fractions. The least common denominator will be 5k times 2k plus 7. So I'll use this to multiply each term on each side. Over here, the 2k plus 7's cancel, and over here, the 5k's cancel. This leaves us with 5k times 3, or 15k. Bring down the equals. And 4 times this quantity. Have to distribute our 4. And let's get rid of the 8k. This leaves us with 7k and 28. And we get rid of the 7. 7's cancel. We're left with k is equal to 4. If you'd like some practice with these concepts, as long as you're at my website, I have 2 worksheets, each with a detailed answer key.